This lecture is on hematology, hema, blood, ology, the study of. And that's what we're going to do. And we've talked about all the components all semester, but we're going to really get down to it today. And the lecture is going to be divided into terms and definitions. That'll be the first part of it. Terms and definitions, and they'll be just interchanged. The second part of it will be disorders, problems that happen to the blood. And then the third aspect will be tests that we run that tell us what's going on in the blood, with the blood. And then the fourth is medical and nursing treatment that we hadn't already discussed. So, terms and definitions, disorders, tests, and treatments, medical and nursing. And I always like to start out with kind of just a regular type beginning and saying that the term blood conjures up emotions. You see blood, it's a little bit emotional. You hear the word, it's a little emotional. And we know that in Christianity, people discuss nothing but the blood of Christ. Judaism, the blood of the Passover was a big deal. Historians stirred up the people by saying things about blood, and George Patton was called Blood and Guts, and he was certainly an emotional innovator. Prime ministers talked to the people and said that they would win the war through blood, sweat, toil, and tears. So I always say, try to get a laugh, my goal today is not to stir your emotions by talking about blood. It's to simply give you the bloody facts. I think that's kind of cute. I hope you do too. All right, let's start with some of the data, terms, definitions regarding blood. And you know that we've already said what hematology means. Hemopoietic means the making of blood. We have areas of the body that are hemopoietic. There are 7 functions of the blood. You probably don't even have to write them down. I'm not going to have you regurgitate. I just want you to realize that there are 7 different functions of blood. It carries oxygen. It is an carbon dioxide transporter and remover. And it removes metabolic waste. It carries hormones. It protects against infection. It requires body temperature. It regulates body temperature and carries food from the GI tract, nutrition. So it has 7 wonderful functions, and you do not need to memorize them or learn them because you know that's what blood does, those 7 things. I just kind of talked about them, but you know what they are. Let's get real straight that blood is made of two components, plasma and cells. And 55% of our blood is plasma. And I do think it's important because in taking care of patients to realize about plasma and blood, and cells. So 55% of blood is plasma. And that's no cells in it. It's just plasma. It's 98% water, and it's got fibrinogen, which helps with clotting. It's got albumin, and albumin, remember, pulls fluid. When we talked about shock, we talked about albumin is what pulls fluid from tissue that's excess and pulls it out into the vascular system and hopefully get rid of it through the kidneys. So we've got albumin, we've got water, we've got fibrinogen, and then gamma globulin. And gamma globulin is our antibodies that are in our blood that we've acquired through disease or through gifts on the maternal side of our life. But that's what makes up plasma. Water, 98%, fibrinogen, albumin, gamma globulin. Now, cells, 45%, and then you can say, what's the other 5? But that's 100. 45% of our blood are cells. Now, let's get this real clear and straight. There are 3 types of cells, and you say, oh, I know those. Get it really straight. They really do not do anything together. They live in the same place, which is blood. But they each have a function that doesn't care what the other one's doing particularly. They just do their own thing. And of course, that involves red cells, which are called erythrocytes, white cells, leukocytes, and platelets, thrombocytes. And I know you've had this in anatomy and physiology, but I just want to review it so we all are together. And of course, red cells deal with nutrients and oxygen, white cells deal with infection and fighting, and thrombocytes deal with clotting. And for the most part, that's what I want you to remember. Platelets will have a little effect with infection. If called upon, platelets can help a little bit, but I'd rather you keep in mind the main functions of the 3 cells, knowing that platelets can veer off and help a little with infection. For the most part, platelets clotting, white is infection fighting, red is nutrients and oxygen. And let's get another thing that will make me so happy if you'll understand the word anemia. Anemia is a low amount of red cells, red only. So don't turn your paperwork in saying the white cells are low because they're anemic. White has to do with infection. It doesn't have to do with red. Red is only the term anemia only deals with red. And get that really in your head, because it'll embarrass me at the school when you go around saying that white cells mean anemia. Red equals anemia. Their blood is formed, and I'm going to talk more about the cells, but blood is formed in the bone marrow, the spleen, the liver, and in utero and early age, bone marrow in the vertebrae and the sternum and the pelvis all make red cells. As we get older, only our long bones deal with blood forming. We can, and you know, our blood goes to capillaries and then turns right around and comes back, and you know that. Well, and they say we're only as healthy as our capillaries, because that's where the transport happens. And if they can't be a transport, then we've got a break in our system. And the best place to know how our vascular system looks, because our capillaries indicate how healthy our vascular system is. So we can tell how healthy our vascular system is by looking at the retina. Because if you've ever looked in the retina in your anatomy and physiology, you see the disc, the optic disc, with the vessels off the sides, and if they're bulbous and look blown up or swollen, they're not of great integrity. If they look good and straight, then our whole vascular system, it's a window truly into our body. The term sepsis, we've already talked about it. We've talked it in several areas, burns and then our shock. And I think most of you know there's an official definition. You don't necessarily have to write it down. If you just say to yourself, it's so much bacteria or viruses in our blood that the good blood cannot get to organs. If you'll just say that to yourself, don't go tell a physiologist that. But if you can just say to yourself, it's so crowded out, good blood is so crowded with bacteria, you're septic. In other words, and here's a fancy definition, decreases tissue perfusion secondary to an invasion in the circulatory system related to bacteria or viruses. Poly, many, cythemia, cy, cell, emia, blood. Poly, blood, poly, cells in the blood. Polycythemia, usually emia, or means, polycythemia means increase in red cells. I want you to know, and when you see it in your book, polycythemia vera, V-E-R-A, they say it's an increase in all the 3 cells. And it can be, and that's the definition of the word. I just don't want you to get hung up on those 2 words, polycythemia vera and polycythemia, because the medical community pretty much uses them interchangeably. Just polycythemia means red, or solid polycythemia can be more than red. Just look at the lab work and see what they're really saying. If all 3 are down, they're probably calling it vera, or they may be just calling it polycythemia. But the point is, the medical community does use it interchangeably. If the liver, if red blood cells are low in your count in your blood, the liver can step up and start making red cells. I told you our bone forming organs are bone marrow, spleen, and liver. Liver doesn't do a lot of it, but it can step it up. I think I read one time 8 times more than it normally does if called upon to. I didn't mention kidneys, but erythropoietin and kidneys, I think most of you all have studied that, because I can tell from your paperwork that you realize red cells are made. The kidneys help with that, the making of red cells with erythropoietin. I want you to know the lymphatic system is a big part of the hemopoietic system, and our lymphatic system is made up of the spleen, tonsils, lymph nodes, and the thymus, the part of the little organ that makes our T cells. You already know we have 10 pints of blood, 5 liters of blood in our body. We lose 20% or 2 pints, our life is in danger. And this is a good time to bring up edema. I just want to bring it up. I don't think I've brought it up again, but I'll just repeat if I have. Edema can go from 1+ to anasarca to brawny. And 1+, I tell students, because this works for me, if I'm working and assessing somebody and I look at their feet or their hands and I just have to study it a minute and say to myself, I think it's swollen. If that's what I'm saying to myself, yeah, I think it's swollen. It's probably a 1+. 2 and 3+ are hard to distinguish, and I don't care. 4+ is pitting, swollen and pitting. When you're, no question, they're swollen, an edematous, and you press down and it pits, makes the pit. That's 4+. Brawny, B-R-A-W-N-Y, is the skin is so shiny that it won't pit. You know they're swollen, but they're so tight they don't even pit, and they may be weeping just a little bit. That's brawny. Anasarca, I think it's in your briefs.